I'm here with my friend Michelle. You know her as Mewtripled on Instagram, YouTube, Patreon, everything.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I'm here with Sia, who is an amazing storyboard artist and has a bomb-ass YouTube channel. So you should watch her videos.
Alright, today we're going to be reacting to this video that's gone viral recently. It's about how the animation industry is collapsing.
It is, just so you know.
By the way, if you'd like to support me or if you want to learn storyboarding, I run a Discord where I do monthly streams and provide personalized mentorship. Link in description below. Alright, let's get back to the video.
The animation industry is on the brink of collapse, and no one is talking about it. There are 5 major reasons why the industry is at a breaking point, and the 5th thing is by far the one that will harm its workers the most. Despite how grim this seems, there may be a light at the end of the tunnel. There are 2 important silver linings that I'll discuss at the end of this video that will lead towards a better future for animation. When the pandemic hit in 2020, it destroyed many jobs in Hollywood, since much of the work was on set or in person. The animation industry, however, was a different story. Since the nature of our jobs was mostly computer work anyway, we were back up and running within a week. Through 2020 and into 2021, the studios, desperate for content, increased their investment in animation because this was the easiest type of content to create fully remote.
So I definitely agree that 2020, while it was a difficult time for, a lot of industries, the one thing that was good, even though the pandemic was terrible, was that, any work from home related jobs kind of thrived. And as animators or artists, when you work digitally, it really was not that new of a concept. There was a lot of artists already working from home during the pandemic. I mean, before the pandemic, but even during the pandemic, it's like, all right, they're kind of continuing the same motion that was already happening pre-pandemic. But I would also say that with more people staying home, more people needed stuff to watch on streaming platforms, which helped animators and artists have more jobs.
I completely agree, and I think the timing of it worked out really nicely because I think 2019, 2020 was still the middle of the streaming boom.
Yeah.
You could say, I remember Netflix was hiring everyone. They had so many projects going on at that time. And there's been pros and cons to that too, I think, because a lot of people that used to have very long commutes, commuting to the studio every single day, they're saving hours. They're saving 8 hours a week sometimes. So that's more time that they can spend with their family, on themselves, on their hobbies, like whatever it is. And it also opened up the doors for a lot of remote workers too. A lot of people in other states, for example, are able to work jobs in LA remotely, and I think that democratizes animation a bit more, in my opinion. You don't have to move to LA.
Yeah, it was a good time. Just for some perspective, I remember in that era, I would get like maybe 5 job interviews per year, and I'd be like, oh no, sorry, I must decline. Now I'm just like, hello.
Yeah, things can really change super quickly.
There was also a larger demand for it as animation streaming increased by 22% during the pandemic, the most of any category. This was the height of the streaming wars, and studios were looking to get as much content as they could to entice people to sign up. If you recall, it was an animated film, Trolls World Tour.
I'll be real, I don't even remember this.
I didn't either. I never watched it.
World Tour. If you recall, it was an animated film, Trolls World Tour, that was the first movie to release on digital at the same time as its original theatrical release. This strategy yielded great returns for Universal. The next few years might be the worst time in the history of the animation industry, and it's for the following 5 reasons. The first reason is that the studios have finally realized that streaming services are a money pit. The pandemic showed an increase in demand for animated content, and studios, eager for a piece of the pie, staffed up its animation teams and greenlit a high volume of animated projects for streaming. It turns out that, to nobody's surprise, the economics of streaming are simply not as lucrative as theatrical releases, and so the increase in spending during the pandemic became a bubble, and now the workers that were staffed up with false promises are feeling the repercussions.
In a way, I just feel like any animated project that gets picked up has to go through its own, episode of Shark Tank or something.
Yeah.
Where I feel like when you're working at an established studio like Disney, Pixar, DreamWorks, they kind of already can fund their own projects. Whereas, Netflix or these streaming services, you're not just always working for Netflix. Like I've had my experiences of like, sometimes I am literally employed by Netflix, but some other projects are like outsourced to smaller studios or other studios like Tonko House or Titmouse. And we would have to kind of rely on the funding from Netflix or like some other bigger company that would want to have our project a part of that streaming platform. So, I feel like there's just a lot of like dependency on like, wow, I hope this bigger company will want this bigger project. And you kind of have like, for those smaller studios, they constantly have to pitch like projects like all the time to these bigger studios, which means that there's a lot of ups and downs of like greenlighting shows or not having shows greenlit, and budgets are not always going to be as big as those more established studios, which means that with tighter budgets, people are gonna be not paid as well sometimes, or have to work on tighter budgets, on tighter timelines or schedules.
It's just a race to the bottom when it comes to schedules and budgets. It's really sad. I think it's also been a bit of a reality check for people that broke in around like 5, 6, 7 years ago. Because you broke in 2018 too, right?
Yeah, that's when we graduated.
Yeah,
right? We graduated 2018, right?
Yeah. Okay. So at that time, pretty much everyone in my graduating class was able to get a job like before they even graduated. The first few years in the industry were all like, oh, like it can't be like that hard to find a job. Like everyone I know like is employed. There seems to be a lot of work going around. If anything, there's a lot of competition for these jobs. But then, like 2-3 years later, everything just collapsed. And what I'm seeing now is a lot of industry veterans that have been working for like 10, 20, 30 years saying that all these ups and downs are actually normal. The streaming boom that we experienced, like graduating, like we just got lucky. Now it's kind of like normalizing a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I will just say, if you have a job opportunity and you're still in school, I would say take the job opportunity.
And take anything, honestly.
Streaming, on the other hand, relies on subscription fees, which are split with the platform and often don't generate the same level of returns. Studios have shifted their spending priorities to invest in projects that they know will yield high returns, aka remakes and sequels.
Okay, I will say for this part, just to like have proof of this, for every job interview I've ever probably had, maybe ever since like 2020, literally after the pandemic, every project I've been interviewed for is based off of something pre-existing. Like I just had one, I think last week for a game. I had one like earlier this year that I have no idea where that project, if it's even happening or if, it's even gone greenlit, was also based off of a game. The last project I worked on was based off of a book, which is coming out on June 28th, Wandslook plugin on Apple TV. And a lot of the projects that have been coming out are just based on something that is pre-existing or, has been made before and people want to make a run edition of it.
Yeah, now that you mention it, only one of the projects I've worked on was an original one.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm on a reboot right now, and before that I was on a show adaptation of like a major franchise.
Yeah. I also remember during the golden days at Netflix, that was when everyone was like, pitch us a show, come pitch your story ideas, everything. And then all of a sudden after that, like literally right after 2020, everyone's like, yeah, we're not taking any pitches, unless if it's like an award-winning webtoon or something.
Yeah, as an aside, I also got kicked out of my parents' Netflix because they live in a different state, and I'm very upset about it.
The most popular animated series today is currently Cocomelon, a show with famously cheap production costs and a subpar animation quality.
My only experience with Cocomelon was when Jorge Gutierrez's show Maya and the Three came out, and he was like constantly in a war with Cocomelon because like you would see his show, which is like a beautifully animated series, which was like number 2 on Netflix, and Cocomelon just always won. They would just keep swapping places, number 1 and number 2, and I was like, wow, this show really can't like be beat by anyone.
Yeah. It's because parents just like
Yeah.
put it on when they're trying to distract their kids, so that increases the screen time that they get.
Yeah. So the key to this is to not have kids.
The studios don't care about the quality. The only thing they care about is that Cocomelon is the #3 most subscribed YouTube channel.
That's
Jesus.
crazy.
Okay.
Studios want to spend as little as possible on animated content moving forward. By the way, there's apparently a Cocomelon movie in the works at DreamWorks. I had to find that out while
What would
researching.
that even be about?
Now you have to live with that information.
Songs.
The animation industry is at its worst point in history is that almost every single studio is currently engaged in massive layoffs. Despite previously embarking on massive hiring sprees during the pandemic, studios now appear lost in their next steps and responding paradoxically with widespread layoffs as their go-to strategy. In November of 2023, Netflix Animation announced its plan to lay off a third of its feature animation team.
I had this experience a few years ago in 2021, like as the pandemic was kind of like ending a little bit. I applied for this job at Netflix. I ended up not getting it, and I was really upset about it at the time. And then a couple months later, I get a different job at a different studio. And the original Netflix show that I applied for ended up being canceled.
Wow.
Right after they shipped their first episode.
That sucks.
Yeah.
I feel thankful, and I honestly don't know what it's like to be a part of something like that. So first off, like, my heart goes off to anyone who has ever been, you know, involved in a layoff like that. I've always kind of just been laid off the traditional way where it's like, hey, here's your end date, we're gonna lay you off that day. Whereas something like that, it's just like
It comes out of the blue.
You could plan your life, and then all of a sudden it's like all of those plans go out the window just because of one day that, you know, executives decide to not go through with this. And like, I think just last week or 2 weeks ago, Pixar just had their round of layoffs. So it's not just streaming platforms, there's also the major established studios that are going through this, but it's also not just animation. I find that, you know, tech companies are going through the same thing, like the FANGs companies are going through it. So there's just something wrong with our world right now.
Yeah, I heard about another film recently that they had just hired a few new storyboard artists like a few months ago. So these people were on the show. Like, the movie was like super close to being shipped off for animation, and then canned it completely.
That's rude.
Like, years of
That
work
is
just gone.
So rude. I hope that somebody comes to save that show or film.
I don't know if I was supposed to like name drop. Maybe I'll beep it out.
Yeah, just bleep out that
I'll
studio.
beep it out.
But that's not all. In other areas of the industry, including animation-related roles in the video game industry, DreamWorks Animation has laid off hundreds of workers, Warner Brothers has shut down Rooster Teeth, Microsoft laid off almost 2,000 workers from Activision Blizzard, and shut down 4 different Bethesda studios, Arcane Austin, Alpha Dog Studios, Roundhouse Games, and Tank.
I hate that this list is so long, but I'm just here to confirm that the list is only continuing to grow. And this video was like posted months ago, so it's still happening.
GameWorks, Sony is laying off 900 workers from Sony Interactive Entertainment, Paramount announced plans for layoffs to affect its animation division, Unity laid off 1,800 employees, Riot Games laid off 11% of its global staff, Electronic Arts laid off 670 employees, and that's all in the last 4 months. The situation is particularly frustrating because these layoffs follow a period of rapid hiring by these same companies. Animators and production workers were brought on board with the promise of long-term projects and a stable career path. It used to be that if you were a Disney animator, you could feasibly work there for 15 to 20 years. But there is so much turnover happening that this is no longer a possibility.
When I was in college, I was convinced that all animation jobs were like that stable. And I remember like way back in the day, all you had to do was like show up with like a bunch of sketches at a big studio and they'll hire you right away and like they'll train you and everything.
Honestly, that's one thing I've learned is like, even though that's how a lot of people in the past probably got their jobs, it's like, you know, life is always changing, things are always changing, and now that we're the ones that are becoming adults and the ones that made the shows that we watched are all like retiring and stuff, it's just like, what applied to them is so different from what applies to us now that it's like, the only sources you can trust are, the community that you're involved in now, who's actually working in the studios now and going through this whole experience. Like one day we're going to be the ones talking about like, make your social media platforms, and then people will be like, no, some other alternative app has been created or something.
You gotta adapt to whatever comes your way. I think that's true for every industry, honestly, not just animation.
You do. You gotta be able to pivot when need be.
Yeah.
While animators lose their jobs and their livelihoods, the executives who made the initial decisions to ramp up spending on streaming are largely unscathed. They may even receive bonuses for cutting costs through layoffs.
This is proof that number one, never believe anything a major corporation says, and number two, they're gonna fuck you over.
Also, I just have to say too, for one of my previous jobs that I won't say what studio it is, one of their key points to really selling this job position to me was being like, we're gonna offer like long-term hire and just have you like work up the ladder within the studio. I feel like if any recruiter tells you this in this day and age, I would definitely question it and don't fully trust them and just think, oh, just because the recruiter said that, we're gonna be here for long-term growth and blah, blah, blah. Like, it's honestly just fluff to probably fill in that emptiness in the interview because they wouldn't really have anything else to say otherwise. That stuff is not applicable to everyone because really whenever the studio is just feeling like they need to make a financial cut or something, they will do it when need be. I was not involved in a layoff, but one of my studios that I worked for before, we had a meeting where a team of people would get laid off from a different sector. So yeah, don't trust them.
Oh yeah, I've also worked at a studio where, my higher ups would tell me like, hey, like this is gonna be a stable job. We're always gonna have projects coming in and everything. And we really make an effort to retain our employees as much as possible.
Yeah.
And then a few months later, they lost the bid for the project and it got, another studio took over.
The third reason that the animation industry is collapsing is from an increase of outsourcing to other countries with cheaper labor. In addition to reducing the amount of spending on animation overall, the studios are also changing the way that they do spend money, and more importantly, where. 2D animation for TV has been outsourced for a long time, but it seems that within the last few years, this is starting to affect feature animation as well. This is not without precedent though. Sony Pictures Imageworks used to operate in Culver City until around 2014, when they packed up and moved most of their production up to Vancouver. One of the people in charge of overseeing the shift was Randy Lake, who was named DreamWorks' chief operating officer a few years ago. He's the one responsible for laying out DreamWorks' plan to lay off hundreds of artists and production workers in favor of taking advantage of foreign tax credits.
From what I've heard, all these studios can hire an artist in Canada, in British Columbia specifically, for half the wage that you would pay a union artist out here.
Yeah, I think that's honestly what I saw too for any of you who don't know, there's a spreadsheet out there called the Salty Animator spreadsheet. Oh yeah. It can show you like how much people get paid working their specific roles in animation across the globe. And there's a lot of people, you'll notice, a lot of LA union animation workers get paid exponentially more than those who are working overseas because again, studios like to make cuts for those like overseas animators when it comes to like outside of the US. I will say I have like kind of mixed thoughts on this because one, I really do think it's nice to give people, internationally an opportunity and that, animation doesn't have to be so centralized and like LA only. Because it's like, yeah, there are people I know of who have family in other countries, and why do you have to sacrifice your livelihood just to come to LA for this? Like, if there's more opportunities around the world for artists to work in animation, that would be cool. But it's like, I just think maybe don't pay them just scraps or pennies or whatever if they're going to be doing the same amount of work that people in LA would do. And if anything, I feel like some people internationally do a lot more work than us because
sometimes,
yeah, I've seen some people in like, I don't know, studios in Korea or Japan straight up animating their storyboards. Like it's a whole like Sakuga animation for a storyboard, and I'm just like, what? Like we just do beat boards, or that's what we're supposed to do, but the standards are raising.
Outsourcing is especially a tricky one. It's nothing new, right? Like since the 80s and 90s, animation has been outsourced to other countries. Even like before digital, like they would actually ship off the frames on paper to Korea to get them animated. I think the only way to rectify this situation in any way is unionizing, because there are certain unions in Hollywood, I believe, that require studios to hire people locally.
Yeah.
And for like certain positions that they're hiring for, they have to be union. They can't fill it with a non-union person. We don't have anything like that in animation yet.
Yeah.
And especially if the studio itself hasn't signed a contract with the Animation Guild, like there's nothing that tells them. And even if they have signed it, there's nothing in the contract, if I remember correctly, that requires them to hire a certain percentage of artists in LA specifically.
Yeah.
It's especially tough for the animators in Canada, Korea, India, like whatever it is. It's especially tough for them to fight these exploitative working conditions because, number one, like not all countries have strong labor laws that allow employees to unionize. And number two, if they unionize and if they ask for better pay, the studio's just gonna like ship off the work somewhere else, like in a place that doesn't have strong labor laws.
Yeah, it's just sad because the studios will go after people who need it the most, but know that they don't have much protection either, so that they can just fall to do whatever the studio wants out of them.
Yeah, I've heard in Japan it's especially bad.
Oh yeah, it is. It's terrible there.
A scathing article from Vulture last year detailed just how chaotic and brutal the working conditions were at Sony Pictures Imageworks for Across the Spider-Verse. An artist was quoted as saying,
what you
over
just
100
talked
people
about.
left the project because they couldn't take it anymore. The animators were forced to work.
At least they have healthcare.
Yeah. I say as my healthcare is about to expire.
The reason that studios are able to get away with this is partially because
I will say there is a Canadian animation union now. I forget the name of it. I'll put it like on the video itself.
Yeah, I remember seeing that.
They're part of IATSE now.
Yeah.
I think they had to form their own local, either like because they're in a different country or something to do with like because they not having to negotiate for healthcare, because that's a big part of our negotiations.
Yeah, I think they already started doing stuff about AI there too. Like I saw something about them trying to regulate it. So.
Yeah, but they are our sister union basically. And the other thing that I forgot to mention earlier is the Animation Guild recently was classified as a national, which means that in the US, any studio anywhere in the US that wants to unionize, they become part of the Animation Guild. It's not just studios in LA.
Yeah.
So in the long run, when it comes to outsourcing and remote work, that's really going to play in our favor.
Yeah. Well, it would be nice for, when I want to move out of state one day, or I don't know.
Yeah.
Philippines, Japan, and more consistently overwork their animators for a reduced rate. The deadlines are unrealistic and the animators are overloaded with shots. But oftentimes the studios will make their artists sign NDAs so that they don't speak out about these harsh conditions.
I don't know if it's illegal to prevent a worker from talking about working conditions through an NDA.
I don't think that
It doesn't seem legal.
First of all, it shouldn't be. Second of all, I've not experienced that myself, but that's pretty messed up if that's the case.
Even if you sign an NDA, like there is still like state law and like federal law.
Yeah,
So if you're being like discriminated against at work or something like that, like it doesn't matter if you sign an NDA saying that you're gonna deal with it.
Yeah, it's like first of all, when you join the union, you have to already take these trainings for harassment that is just like, how is this suddenly negated through an NDA for a unionized position? So that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Recently, artists at studios like MAPPA in Japan have started to leak how brutal the working conditions are, and I hope that more stories come out about these working conditions in other countries and studios. It's unfortunate that
If you want the LA animation version, there's Tag Story or Tag...
Stories?
Yeah.
Stories of Tag.
Stories of Tag for US people.
Yeah. I do think a lot of the time it comes down to the working culture in a lot of different countries, because Japanese people are known for having a very strong work ethic, and the idea of unionizing, I can't speak for Japanese people, but I imagine there's not as much incentive to unionize as there is here.
Yeah, I just think when it comes to the entirety of East Asia in general, they are very behind when it comes to the rights of artists who, for people in the US who think that, art is not a real job, it's a different story in Asia.
their animation industries rely altogether on outsourced work from American studios.
Yeah, like they rely on the American budget too, which probably is going to be less when they outsource to Japan, Korea, whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, ultimately, being an artist sucks in Japan.
Number 4, in addition to corporate priorities shifting, a lot of corporations are changing hands quite frequently. The film industry is experiencing a wave of consolidation and mergers.
I should also say it should not be legal for Disney to own everything.
I agree. I think it's actually annoying as a consumer.
An antitrust lawsuit against the 8 largest motion picture companies at the time, effectively preventing them from engaging in monopolistic practices. But in August of 2020, the DOJ repealed these decrees, effectively giving the green light to these studios to consolidate all they want. When Disney completed its acquisition of 20th Century Fox, this included Fox's animation studio, Blue Sky.
It was so gutting when
Honestly,
Blue Sky shut down.
Yeah.
At least when I was at Ringling, like Ringling and Blue Sky had a very strong relationship.
Yeah.
Artists from there would come to recruit at Ringling, or they'd come to like teach at
Yeah.
Ringling. A lot of my friends and classmates from Ringling interned there when they were
Yeah.
juniors, and they moved to the East Coast to work there
Yeah.
for a long amount of time. And it was the only major animation studio on the East Coast.
Yeah, that was like our only beacon of hope. If you're ever just like, I want to live the New York life as an artist, like as an animator, that was probably your only like safe place maybe. But now it's just like, yeah, I don't really even know what's going on in the East Coast. Like there's sometimes some Netflix stuff, sometimes some Nickelodeon stuff.
Titmouse. I
But
think, is
yeah,
out there.
Titmouse too. But for the most part, I just remembered like, so one of the projects I worked on, a lot of the people came from Blue Sky as well. And when that happened, like everyone at the studio was just so upset by it. And even if it's like you're not working at that studio there, it's like you leave behind so many colleagues, friends, mentors, people that you've worked with that are now like probably going to be out of work for some time. But I will say this is when our industry is really strong, because we come together and we know when people get laid off, and we will come in and like swing in and swoop people up and be like, hey, work for us or something.
Yeah, most of the people that I know worked at Blue Sky were able to come out to LA and work at all of the major studios here.
Yeah.
So it's not the end of the world, but it is the end of an era, and it's absolutely just gutting to see a studio with that kind of legacy just shut down one day.
Yeah, and it's also just like artists have to pick up their lives and like leave. Like you don't know what type of life they built in that city, and now they have to be like, okay, goodbye everyone I ever met, and leave your home and find a new apartment.
Horrible.
Months for Disney to shut down Blue Sky and absorb its IP into the Disney family. Hundreds of workers were suddenly displaced because Blue Sky was pretty much the only large animation studio operating on the East Coast. Famously, one of Blue Sky's last projects, Nimona, was canceled by Disney after Blue Sky was shuttered. The movie ended up surviving and was finished up by DNEG Animation for Netflix. It even got a Best Animated Film nomination over Disney's Wish.
I will say that even though you're not supposed to share work of projects that don't get released, if you want my insider tip as an artist in the industry, just do it anyway. Just password protect it. I just feel like, you know, sure, you might risk some legal trouble, and I am not advocating that at all, but I will say that if you're in a position where you really need to show this piece of work, password protect that shit.
Yeah, this is not legal advice.
Considering just how profitable Illumination is compared to DreamWorks, it's not unfounded to worry that DreamWorks could face a similar fate as Blue Sky. This is the sobering reality of
In other words, studios don't give a shit about you.
Yep.
instead. And speaking of AI, time to talk about everyone.
There it is. Let's go.
2 years ago, it seemed like AI was decades away from becoming a real threat to Hollywood. But suddenly, in the last several weeks, several companies have shown
I prepared
significant
notes for this
strides in
part.
generative AI. Most notably was OpenAI's Sora, a text-to-video AI that yields stunning results. Jeffrey Katzenberg, the co-founder of DreamWorks, even said that AI will eliminate 90% of artist jobs on animated films. Though Jeffrey also founded Quibi, so take that with a grain of salt.
That's why I would definitely say take a lot of this news with a grain of salt too, because I feel like hearing this, like I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of like a student right now. It's like devastating to hear, and you're like, wow, I literally have no future in my career, which it sounds this way, but I don't think that these things are gonna happen like abruptly, like overnight, where suddenly like the next day this job position no longer exists. to a degree, I think AI will still always need an artist that understands the craft to refine whatever it makes. AI creates really cool things. I've seen how rendered and detailed it can make stuff, and you know, being aware of that power is good, but at the same time, it's not just about making good art when you're working at a studio. It's making art that aligns with what the directors, the showrunner, the creator wants. And if you've like made prompts on AI yourself, you've probably noticed it doesn't always get things exactly the way that you want it to, even when you try to revise the prompt and you're like, okay, but like make them have 5 fingers or something.
I have to show you something. You know when you're Googling reference for something, and sometimes Google started like showing you AI stuff for when you Google image search? This is what popped up for one of my coworkers.
Is that right?
I think she Googled man eating in a hospital bed, something along those lines. I don't know why it's Ryan Reynolds.
I feel like AI art definitely has its style. Like, I feel like people are getting better at recognizing when AI art is made. Like, it does have a very distinct style. There are times it can get away with actually making you believe a human made it, but I still feel like, again, it's just not about creating good art. It's about creating art that is in alignment with what this person wanted to make. So
AI is something to keep an eye on, but I don't think it's time to start freaking about it just yet. Because number one, sometimes you see the shit AI comes up with and you're like, this is not replacing my job by any means.
Yeah.
And then there's also like a big legal can of worms that you're opening with AI, because how do copyrights work in that scenario?
Yeah, I would also say that, you know, with these news coming out, just remember that, you know, news articles and websites need great headliners. Talking about AI is always a great headliner, so they will use the most devastating thing to make you believe like, oh, there really is no hope, when it's like there's a little bit more nuance to that. Sure, there will probably be a slim down of like job opportunities for some roles that I can see being replaced, but there are still like a lot of other positions that I think it would take a long time for AI to like be implemented to fully take over, and no artist exists even to like help out with the pipeline of refining things. Like, you know, there's still like some of a gray area before we get to like absolutely no jobs exist anymore. So I would say to just keep doing your thing while staying tuned to the news, and don't let this just make you quit all of your passions and dreams, because let's just remember where NFTs went.
True. There was a US court recently that ruled that generative AI work cannot be copyrighted.
Yeah.
To get a copyright for something, it has to be created by a human. So that creates a whole IP nightmare for the legal departments at the studio, because even if they start creating work with AI, they can't copyright it. Anyone can take it.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, there are, I want to say 6 or 7 lawsuits going on right now against these AI companies, because, you know, to create the generative AI, they have to scrape information from the internet, and that includes work that is copyrighted to other artists. And it's a whole like legal gray area that none of us know where it's gonna go. Like, I'm not a lawyer, clearly, but it's not as like cut and dry as it seems, like you said.
Yeah, and basically, like, if you do make something based off of AI and you can't copyright it, like, you're pretty much just allowing people to just make stuff off of yours. And what if one day an actual artist gets inspired by your stuff and they don't even like use your AI content, but it inspires them to create something that they can copyright? Well, then now your non-copyrighted idea now belongs to somebody else who was actually capable of creating the thing that you couldn't.
Yeah, the Writers Guild also won some pretty significant wins against AI, like protections, you could say.
That's good.
So in the contract, they included that studios cannot use AI generated scripts, if I remember correctly. They cannot hand an AI generated script to a writer and have the writer fix it and not give the writer credit.
Yeah.
This is why they went on strike, pretty much, because it's such an existential threat for them. And it always goes back to unions, honestly.
Yeah, it was tough, but it was worth it.
Yeah. the Writers Guild contract doesn't actually apply to animation writers for the most part, because our writers fall under the Animation Guild, not the Writers Guild. There's only like one studio, I think. I think Fox 20th Century that has WGA writers, which is why I was laid off when the writers on King of the Hill went on strike.
I see.
But the rest of the animation industry just kept on going along. They just kept an eye on what's going on with the writers, because usually whatever the writers that win, we're able to ask for like breadcrumbs of that basically during our own negotiations.
Unless if the animation union strikes this summer, which I've heard about happening, so.
We'll see.
Hey, quick update. I'm launching a 5-day all-inclusive in-person artist retreat in Lake Arrowhead, California, with art classes for all skill levels and personal mentoring to help you reach your art goals. In addition to that, I also have a new 6-week virtual coaching program coming up, specifically for artists with ADHD, and we'll be focusing on the unique challenges that come with being an artist with a neurodivergent condition. If you're interested in either of those programs, there's going to be 2 different Google Forms linked in the description box down below, so just fill them out and I'll get back to you with more details. Okay, back to the video.
All the way through, because when we do, the displacement of workers doesn't really make logical sense. Most CEOs will agree that AI is a tool, saying that it's like a power tool versus a screwdriver. But imagine a construction foreman building a house who gets some really shiny new power tools. The foreman determines that these new power tools are so easy to use that they turn around and fire the experienced carpenters in favor of having unskilled workers handle complex construction.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah. This goes back to the whole, like, you know, sure, AI can create interesting and fully rendered art, but at the same time, like, how are you going to master that back and forth of an artist communicating with the director about what they want and, you know, aligning with what they want? Like, I've seen all of these AI generated art slideshows on Instagram Reels of like muscle cats. I don't know if you've seen that, where they kind of make these full-on storylines with just these illustrations of AI generated cats. But while it's funny and cool, there's always like these discrepancies between each image that doesn't fully flow or align, and you need an artist to kind of go in to like refine these moments so that it's a cohesive story and not like, oh, there's a different thing in each image even though it's generally the same thing.
I think a lot of times when it comes to new technology, I do think the audiences will adapt a bit more in terms of, at this point, it's pretty easy to tell if something is AI versus not being AI.
Yeah, and I think people online know what they want. Like, there's a time where they are fine consuming AI-generated content like these silly Instagram Reels, sure. But there's a time they also want to consume something that's real, and I think that people also do have a sense of integrity too when they, you know, have their interests. Like, I think people will have a space for liking AI generated stuff here, but I think that people will still always want to see something made by someone.
This is a false cause fallacy in logic. Ease of use does not negate the value of expertise, akin to assuming a power tool's efficiency renders a skilled carpenter's experience unnecessary. Unfortunately, that seems to be exactly what's going to happen in Hollywood. OpenAI is currently meeting with Hollywood studio executives to show how they can utilize their new tool. But if you notice, they're not meeting with any creatives at the same studios, like animators or VFX supervisors. This approach might lead to even more layoffs rather.
I also want to point out how fucked up it is that in 2024, AI is taking over all the creative jobs and leaving us to do all the bullshit medial jobs.
Yeah.
You would think it's the other way around.
Yeah, people who are not artists who are in these leadership positions don't really understand the craft or what is necessary to make a film good. Honestly, a part of this has to just be us waiting to just see how bad some AI generated projects or films can be for them to eventually be like, okay, fine, artists, come back, come help us now.
I want AI to cook my food and park my car. I don't want it to take my job.
Why don't you solve world issues?
Artists with AI to enhance their efficiency. Despite CEOs claiming AI will boost productivity, the reality often shifts towards reducing staff under the guise of saving time and money, mirroring the flawed logic from earlier that more efficient tools require fewer skilled workers. There's always the advice of learning a new skill to stay relevant, but frankly, this is becoming less and less practical. For years, there have been countless articles encouraging people to learn how to code so they don't get left behind. I'm sure you've seen them. But now, the CEO of NVIDIA is publicly declaring that coding will be a skill offloaded to AI. So
most of the time when you have a new technology that pops up, that can also lead to job creep instead of taking the workload off of artists.
Yeah.
So if you look at storyboard artists, for example, in the 90s, like all you had to do was like board on paper and have like one clear, like super expressive drawing. And that storyboard would get shipped off to a background designer and a layout artist to break down into poses. And then they'd have like a keyframe animator. Those were all separate jobs. Today, because we have Storyboard Pro, it's all one job. You can do everything in one software. And you have storyboard artists today doing the jobs of 5 people, but they're getting paid for 1.
Yeah, no, I would definitely say that this is going to be a thing that, whether if it's AI or another tool, I always think there's going to be some form of technology that is going to create this cycle of people needing to onboard more responsibilities. Because, like, let's be real, if AI really does take over, then okay, you're the director, make your whole film then. Like,
practical anymore. And you know what? He's absolutely right. If you don't think AI will be coming for literally any other skill that you would be teaching yourself, you're in for a rude awakening. Like I mentioned earlier, studios are not primarily interested in high quality content. These studios are a business at the end of the day, and they care first about what they will get back in returns at the box office. I said this when I spoke up last year about the visual effects in The Flash, and it's only a matter of time before the animation industry feels this as well. These companies are looking for any reason to use AI not as a tool, but as an excuse to significantly reduce spending on pesky human artists. When we say that generative AI threatens the livelihood of artists, this is what we're talking about. Because at the end of the day, ChatGPT is not the one calling in hundreds of artists onto one Zoom call to tell them that they've all been laid off. It's the humans that are doing this.
Wasn't it Nintendo where the CEOs and the execs took a big pay cut to avoid firing their artists?
I forgot. I don't know, but I did hear some story that was like a generous, like, I don't know, someone being generous. I was like, oh, how rare.
There are 2 major silver linings ahead. So the first thing you can do to help shape the future of this industry is to support indie animation. My own indie animation studio, Zop Studios, is developing our first animated short film for VR called New Venice. It's sort of like WALL-E meets Metropolis in VR. I won't take too much time discussing it here, but you can learn more about this project as well as when our Kickstarter will go live.
The best on his project.
But that brings up another related point. If you're not sharing your own work on social media, you absolutely should be doing so.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, let me tell you why. First of all, I'm saying this at a bad time because Instagram is currently going through their own AI issues right now. But that doesn't take away the point that I really do think whatever platform is popping right now, I feel like that's where artists need to be. If Kara or Kara does, blow up and become a new alternative to Instagram, I think that would be great for artists. My only caveat is at the date that this video is recording, it's really only primarily artists joining the app. I think artists still need a platform where they have outreach to like more universal people because that's who you're creating content for other than just artists. I will definitely say social media is a very intimidating and frustrating, exhausting place to be. But I do think that for the longevity of an art career these days, it is starting to prove more necessary to have because, I mean, even when he talks about these indie projects that are blowing up, it's from, an artist that has been sharing their art online for some time, like Visby Pop or
Has Been Hotel.
Those projects. And there's another one on YouTube called The Digital Circus that is from I think it's like an indie animation studio that's on YouTube. I honestly don't know too much about it, but the point of the matter is that there is an established presence on YouTube, Instagram, or hopefully Kara one day that people can share their work on to eventually have these projects they could just dish out because they have a presence. Anything they make, they could just dish out and hopefully like most or some of them will be successful.
It's crazy how much these algorithms influence our entire livelihoods.
I know, literally.
Just the holy algorithm.
Now, this is all great news for indie artists that have the capacity to strike out on their own, but for the artists that are currently in the larger studios fighting for their right to work, it's a very different environment. Eventually, the studios will want to hire artists to clean up AI-generated content for a significantly lower rate. And I know this because the studios wanted to do the same exact thing with the screenwriters last year.
This is just something sad that I think I want to comment on, is that it's funny because I think artists are fully capable of doing their own thing. You can literally make your own show, you can make your own comic, all of this. I just think that it's the skill set to like get that rolling as a business, which, you know, I hope that more art schools teach in the future rather than just teaching you how to be an artist for a specific job position. Why not teach how to be an artist that can literally run their own thing? You know what you need to do your own thing, and I think you can. It's just about breaking out of that mindset of like, I need to work for a company to be valid or have a full career going, when it's like you can break out of it and find your childhood artist self that made those films again. Except now you have a Kickstarter and hopefully have some form of funding through like an audience online or something.
Yeah, business and marketing are definitely completely different skills from just the art aspect itself.
Yeah. Honestly, I would say what art schools should do or can do is to have students like still make a student film for their years of whatever time they're at school, but practice doing Kickstarters or practice some sort of crowdfunding with it to like get that experience of making money off of your own art.
Which brings us to why striking right now is so important, and the second major silver lining. This silver lining is more complicated, but let me explain here. There is a chance that Hollywood might shut down again this summer because of the upcoming negotiations between the studios and IATSE. IATSE is the largest union in Hollywood. Animation workers in the Animation Guild, or TAG, are part of IATSE. They negotiate their master agreement separately from the IATSE basic agreement, though it references the basic agreement for health and pension benefits. TAG's master agreement expires at the end of July and will not renegotiate until August.
That's literally the week that I'm being laid off from my job.
Really? What? Oh my, well, it could be good timing because what if something happened afterwards, you know?
Therefore, if IATSE strikes this summer, TAG will have the option to participate in solidarity actions authorized by their union, but separately, TAG could vote to authorize their own strike against the AMPTP, which would mean many large...
You remember when 2-3 years ago when IATSE almost went on strike?
Oh yeah.
That whole summer was like a whole...
that was a time.
I think they had 99% of the membership. 99% voting yes to a strike, and it was 90% of their membership that voted.
Yeah, I will say one thing that is great about at least my experience in the animation union is everyone is very proactive in doing something to improve the state of our industry.
Painful as strikes are, I actually think this is one of the more important ones for animation. Not only will it lead to radical change if they succeed, but there's actually a precedent of animation workers striking successfully. In 1941, the workers at Disney went on strike after years of long hours, low pay, and broken promises. Even Snow White's record-breaking box office numbers didn't translate to fair treatment for the workers. Their 4-month strike proved historic, forcing Disney to recognize the union and paving the way for better working conditions not only in animation, but the film industry in general. This was one of the first instances of a successful strike in Hollywood.
Even though there's a lot of bad news coming out these days, I will say, again, I guess another silver lining to add to this is that I feel like artists are pretty proactive when it comes. We don't just sit around and do nothing. Like, again, going back to the whole AI taking over Instagram, you know, the Kara app was already put out. People are already pushing the app. People are coming together to do things, and we're not very like just gonna sit around and do nothing. So it's like, while there's a lot of bad news that comes out, it's like you don't really know what steps the artists will take next, which I think have been pretty cool and monumental, like Glaze, that app that puts a layer to protect your art from AI. It's like a lot of cool things from the art side to combat these things have also been happening, so
People always adapt.
The writers and actors got much of what they asked for by striking for so long, including some protections from AI. In my opinion, animators need to demand better working conditions from the studios, especially in light of the increased demand for animation content. They should also be asking for workplace safety measures, such as guarantees regarding remote work options, mental health support, and measures to prevent crunch time. They should be pushing for job security measures, including longer-term contracts and severance pay. Most importantly, they should be demanding protection protections against the displacement of human labor by AI technologies, including requiring human oversight of AI-generated content, or at least compensation for the use of AI that directly impacts their job.
I will say this is why, in a way, it sucks that Instagram had the whole, difficulty to opt out of AI thing happen. But I do think it's kind of a good, wake-up call or reminder, because I feel like, when these incidents have too many periods of nothing going on, we kind of forget, we get a little laid back, we don't want to do anything about it. If it's going to happen on Instagram, I think people in the animation industry are going to remain extra alert for when they do have to make these negotiations and really ham in on the whole AI thing.
Yeah, I think right now what we're seeing is a bit reminiscent of the huge wave of labor activity after the Great Depression. That was when you had all the people working in those industrial fields unionizing. Yeah. That's, I believe, when the Fair Labor Standards Act was enacted, if I remember correctly. So at that time, that's why you had the Disney strike of 1941. Yeah. Now, I think we're seeing something similar, because this was the first time that WGA and SAG had gone on strike at the same time.
Yeah.
First time in 60 years, I think.
Yep, team power.
We are at a crossroads right now where the technology is new enough to start putting in safeguards for the humans that will be affected, and it's not too late to get protections against AI in writing. The WGA did it last year, and IATSE can do it again this year. Look, striking is not an ideal situation. I am very empathetic to the fact that not everyone's situation is the same, and some people are still struggling from the strikes last year. I get that. But at this moment in history, it's crucial to...
I know a lot of people are struggling with job hunting and unemployment right now, but what I did hear from a lot of writers and actors last year was that they're already not working.
Yeah.
They already have side gigs.
Yeah.
So if they go on strike, they have nothing to lose at that point.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. I was just I feel like everyone's already kind of either laid off or just already all laid off or about to get laid off. So it's well, what's the point? We might as well just deal with this once and for all kind of thing. Just deal with it now.
If I was a CEO, I would be very scared of a workforce that had nothing to lose.
Yeah.
And everything to gain.
I know, because I'm just we're already at the bottom, so might
can't get worse than here.
Yeah.
Strikes aren't just about the immediate grievances. They're a call for long-term sustainability in our profession, respect for our craft, and a fair share in the industry we pour our hearts into. It's about making our voices heard, demanding respect and recognition we deserve, and securing a future where we're not perpetually on the brink of losing everything we worked for. I wanted to make this video because I feel so passionately about the animation industry, clearly. I've made lifelong friends from this industry, and it's full of some of the most genuinely good people that I've ever met. Everyone in animation is basically the polar opposite of the typical Hollywood personality, and it's made working in this industry so much fun.
I think it's because artists tend to be more introverted, so we'd rather hide behind a screen than be in front of the camera.
Or it's we would rather have our stuff be more contained, where it's not overwhelming.
We all understand that what we do is not life or death. We're making cartoons. We're not nurses or surgeons or coal miners, and we're not risking our lives every day. But our work is important to people who need a break from the stresses of everyday life and just want a glimmer of escapism. The worlds that these human artists create in our industry are more important to people than even we realize, and none of us want to see the spark of creativity extinguished by a few studio executives looking to buy a bigger yacht.
There was a journalist in Gaza right now who talked about animation in one of her Instagram posts. She always talked about how when she was a kid and watched animated, when she watched cartoons as a kid, she always saw the good guys beating the bad guys, right?
Yeah.
And she mentioned that in one of her Instagram stories.
Yeah.
So it just goes to show you how powerful it can be.
It is, and I feel really the reasons why we're here today, and I don't think our generation is dumb or anything, but I really think because of animation, we've been influenced to be better people and be motivated to pursue our passions and, approach them in a way that will eventually help others and whatnot. And it would kind of be sad to see a world where animation just kind of diminishes and we're just fed this low quality shit that just is here's for your short attention span, but not much value added. But, hopefully we'll be able to sustain that.
I feel like we're definitely at a crossroads right now, and it could go in any direction. Overall, like, I thought the video was a very concise summary of like what's going on right now.
Yeah, honestly, I'm like just kind of impressed that I'm not sure if this person works in animation or he just, again, maybe knows a lot of people, but this, I would say, is a pretty solid video of a summary of like what's going on. This is the time to create your own stuff while you can and take action against these things while you can, you know, while really the industry, there's really nothing going on, so you might as well do something now.
Yeah, and I like that this video is accessible and easy to understand for people outside of animation and outside of Hollywood probably.
Yeah.
Like, there was nothing where I'm like, okay, like the average person might not understand what's going on.
Yeah, I don't think that being an artist is just suddenly gonna disappear as a role from this earth. I just think what that looks like is gonna change, and we're going through that right now.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I think this is a good note to end the video on.
Yeah, well,
cool.
Thanks for watching this video.
Yeah, thanks for watching, and hopefully we'll do this again sometime.
Yeah,
check out Michelle on all of her socials as Mewtripled.
Thank you.
I'm here as See a Mystery on Instagram and YouTube.
All the storyboard tips and tricks.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for watching.